Imagine you're just sitting in a circle of folding chairs in some, slightly sterile community center room.
Oh yeah, the classic fluorescent lighting.
Right, exactly. And the person sitting across from you, someone you barely even know, looks you right in the eye and asks you to stand up and, physically play the role of their crippling fear of abandonment.
Which is an incredibly intense thing to ask of a stranger.
It's wild. You aren't just talking about the fear, you're literally acting it out, embodying it in the middle of the room. And it strikes me because usually when we think of psychological healing or clinical diagnosis, we sort of, we crave the precision of physical medicine.
Oh, for sure. We want the x-ray.
Yeah. If you break your arm, the x-ray shows a jagged white line, the doctor points to it, and the protocol is set. It's visible, it's binary, broken or not broken.
But the ambiguity of human psychology just totally strips away that comfort. I mean, entirely. When we move from the physical body to the intricacies of the mind, and specifically when we add the chaotic variable of other human beings into the mix, the diagnostic landscape just becomes incredibly murky.
Because we aren't isolated data points.
Exactly. We are fundamentally social creatures. You, the listener, you exist in this complex web of groups right this very second. Think about your family of origin, your current household, the hierarchy at your workplace, your friend circles, even the silent negotiated social contract you have with strangers on a morning commute.
The unspoken rules of the subway car.
Right. Yet the invisible currents that are pulling us under the surface of all these interactions, they remain largely unexamined by most people.
We just sort of assume a tense meeting at work is just, well, it's just a meeting. Or that a recurring argument with a spouse is just a personality clash. But if we actually pull back the curtain on how these groups function, the mechanics are staggering.
They really are.
So our mission for this deep dive is to explore those underlying psychological dynamics operating just beneath the surface of the groups you exist in every single day. We are utilizing an incredible stack of source material today, leaning really heavily into Gerald Corey's authoritative text theory and practice of group counseling, alongside some specific clinical framework.
Some really powerful frameworks.
Yeah, we're dissecting 3 transformative approaches to group therapy. We're looking at psychodrama, Gestalt therapy, and transactional analysis.
And examining these 3 frameworks side by side reveals this fascinating contrast in methodology. The strategies diverge wildly. I mean, we are moving from literal theatrical reenactments of deep trauma to a hyper-focus on the micro-expressions, the physical tension in a person's body, and then all the way to mapping out cognitive blueprints with the precision of, a software engineer.
It's a huge spectrum.
It is. The execution is entirely different across the board. However, they are all anchored to one vital, unifying core goal, which is freeing the individual from the gravity of their past so they can live fully, authentically, and intentionally in the present moment.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the approach that physically puts that past right in the center of the room. Before we look inward at bodily sensations or analyze mental rule books, we need to examine what happens when you take internal conflict and project it onto a physical stage. Psychodrama. Developed in the 1930s by psychiatrist J.L. Moreno and later expanded by Zerka Toman Moreno, it totally flips the traditional script of therapy. It abandons that cliche image of sitting quietly on a couch talking about a problem.
Right, there's no couch here.
Psychodrama demands that you show the group the problem. It is action-oriented. You play out a memory from 20 years ago, or maybe an anticipated confrontation that hasn't even happened yet, as if it is unfolding right here, right now.
And to achieve that level of externalization, Moreno essentially engineered a clinical theater. The structure relies on a very specific cast of characters. You have the therapist, who functions as the director.
Director with a capital D.
Capital D, exactly. They aren't just a passive listener taking notes. They are actively facilitating the exploration, maintaining the psychological safety of the environment, and really guiding the emotional arc of the session.
Because it can get intense.
Very. Then you have the protagonist. This is the group member who volunteers to be the focal point of the enactment. And what's crucial to understand about the protagonist is that they are the absolute source of the imagery. They dictate the reality of the scene being explored.
They're the architect of the memory.
Yes.
And to build that memory in real time, they require a supporting cast, which brings us to the auxiliary egos. Corey's text emphasizes how expansive this concept really is. The protagonist selects other group members to play significant roles in their life space.
So they could be a living parent, a deceased partner, or, an abusive former boss.
But it even extends into the abstract, right? Like, you might be asked to play a protagonist's childhood pet, or a specific traumatic event, or even their own internalized inner critic,
Yeah, you are literally stepping into someone else's psychic architecture.
which I imagine requires an immense amount of clinical discipline from the group members playing those roles.
Oh, absolutely. Zerka Toman Moreno codified 4 distinct functions for these auxiliary egos. They don't just stand there and improvise blindly. First off, they must actively play out the perceptions held by the protagonist. They are mirroring the protagonist's internal reality.
Okay, so they're a mirror first.
Right. Second, they investigate the interaction between the protagonist and their own roles, really probing the dynamic. Third, they interpret this interaction for the group. And fourth, they act as therapeutic guides.
Therapeutic guides, what does that look like?
It means they aren't just reciting lines. They are gently pushing the protagonist to develop an improved relationship with the entity they represent.
Okay, but I struggle with this specific mechanic. Let's look at the practical application. If I'm the protagonist and I'm trying to work through a deeply nuanced, maybe psychologically abusive relationship with my mother, and I ask a virtual stranger in my therapy group to play her,
Right.
isn't there a massive risk that they get it entirely wrong? Like, if my mother was quietly, coldly manipulative and this group member plays her like some screening cartoon villain, doesn't that just shatter the reality of the memory? It seems incredibly risky to hand over the representation of your trauma to, well, an amateur actor.
That is a completely valid concern. But the structure of psychodrama actively prevents that hijacking of the narrative. The protagonist remains the director of their own internal reality.
Oh, so they can stop it.
Exactly. If the auxiliary ego begins to play the mother aggressively, the therapist will pause the action. The protagonist is then instructed to explicitly coach the auxiliary. Yeah, they will say, no, she wouldn't raise her voice. She would cross her arms, look at the floor, and whisper. The protagonist physically shapes the performance until it matches their internal reality. The process never involves coercion, and the auxiliary is entirely in service to the protagonist's truth.
That coaching element is vital. It keeps the locus of control with the person actually experiencing the trauma.
Exactly. And all of this coaching and acting happens within a designated physical space. The stage. But reading through the clinical literature, the stage isn't just about having an elevated platform in a room.
No, it's about the spatial geometry altering psychological boundaries, right? When you step into that designated area, you are collectively agreeing to suspend current reality.
It creates a liminal space. The stage represents an extension of the protagonist's life space. By physically stepping over a boundary line in the room, the brain allows itself to fully inhabit that childhood kitchen or the hostile boardroom.
And surrounding this liminal space is the audience.
Right, the rest of the group.
And the group members not actively participating in the scene are far from passive spectators. The psychological weight of watching a psychodrama unfold acts as a supportive mirror. The audience gains profound insights into their own interpersonal conflicts through secondary identification.
Yes, in the final phase of a session, they share how the enactment resonated with their own lives, which really grounds the protagonist and reminds them they aren't isolated in their pain.
The mechanics of how this plays out on that stage are just fascinating. The cornerstone technique, the one that seems to drive the most radical cognitive shifts, is role reversal.
Oh, role reversal is incredibly powerful.
The director will suddenly pause the scene where a protagonist is, say, arguing with their father and yell, "Reverse roles!" And the protagonist physically swaps places with the auxiliary ego. The protagonist now becomes their father, speaking to themselves.
And the neurobiology underlying this technique is profound. When you force a person to physically adopt the posture, the vocal cadence, and the worldview of the person they are in conflict with, you are activating the brain's empathy circuits in a way that mere conversation just cannot achieve.
You're not just intellectualizing it.
Exactly. You aren't just intellectually deducing that your father was stressed. By puffing out your chest, lowering your voice, and physically defending his position, you experience the psychological weight of his reality. It shatters the rigid, egocentric view of the conflict. The protagonist formulates visceral, emotional insights into the other person's limitations and fears.
It completely dismantles the victim versus villain binary we naturally construct in our memories. You realize the villain in your story is actually just a terrified, overwhelmed human being.
Right. And practically, as we discussed with the coaching aspect, role reversal is how the protagonist trains the auxiliary ego.
Oh, because they're demonstrating it.
Yes. By playing the father for 3 minutes, the protagonist hands over the exact blueprint of the behavior. Then they swap back, and the auxiliary can deliver a terrifyingly accurate performance.
Which leads to techniques designed to break down a group's initial resistance to this kind of intense vulnerability. Because jumping straight into trauma theater is a lot.
Warm-ups are critical. You can't just dive in.
Right. And psychodrama employs a technique called the magic shop, which serves as an extraordinary tool for values clarification. The director asks the protagonist to visualize a shop filled with exotic bottles and jars.
But these containers don't hold physical items. They hold personal qualities: courage, patience, empathy, ruthlessness.
And if a protagonist walks into this imaginary shop with the shopkeeper played by an auxiliary ego and asks to buy a bottle of assertiveness, they can't just pay for it with cash. The shopkeeper demands a psychological barter.
This is where it gets really revealing. The
Mm.
shopkeeper might agree to hand over the assertiveness, but they will demand the protagonist's need to please everyone in exchange.
Oh, wow.
Or, even more challenging, they might demand something the protagonist deeply values, like their sensitivity. The negotiation forces the protagonist to articulate what they believe they need to survive, what they are clinging to, and what they're actually willing to sacrifice to achieve growth.
Because you can't have both.
Right. It brings abstract core values out of the intellectual realm and forces a real-time, high-stakes negotiation.
It externalizes the internal bargaining we do every single day. If I want peace of mind, I have to trade in my relentless ambition. Saying that out loud to another human being makes the abstract cost incredibly real.
It does.
And that really highlights the primary function of psychodrama. It takes the invisible rehearsals in our heads, the imaginary arguments we win in the shower, the conversations we practice on our commute, and exposes them to reality. It shows us how we actually present ourselves, stripping away the distortions of isolation.
But, and this is an important transition, psychodrama's reliance on externalizing conflict presents a specific limitation. It assumes the client is deeply connected to their own emotional landscape and merely needs a stage to express it.
Right, what if they aren't?
Exactly. What happens when a group member is so profoundly disconnected from their own physical reality that they can't even feel the emotions they are trying to act out?
What?
Externalizing a memory doesn't work if you are fundamentally numb to the present moment.
You're just going through the motions.
Yeah. This gap in the therapeutic process requires a radical shift in focus, moving from the physical stage of external action to the internal stage of immediate awareness.
Which brings us perfectly into Gestalt therapy. If psychodrama is about reenacting the past out loud, Gestalt therapy, which was developed by Fritz and Laura Perls in the 1940s, is about hauling the past directly into the present moment, the here and now.
To heal it within the physical body.
Right. Gestalt abandons the theatrical expansion of Moreno and replaces it with an intense, almost uncomfortable, laser-like concentration on the present tense. The foundational premise is that the past is gone, the future hasn't arrived, and the present moment is the only place where true contact and change are biologically possible.
The Pearls believe that our psychological suffering stems from what they termed unfinished business.
Unfinished business.
Yes. These are unexpressed feelings, deep resentment, rage, grief, guilt, or abandonment tied to distinct memories. Because these emotions were never fully processed or expressed in the moment they occurred, they linger in the background. They do not fade.
They just sit there.
They actively interfere with your ability to have authentic contact with your environment and with other people in the present tense.
The most accurate analogy for unfinished business is how a computer operating system manages RAM. Imagine you have a web browser open with 50 tabs.
Oh, I live this every day.
We all do. In one tab, you have an unresolved argument with your partner from Tuesday. In another tab, there is a perceived slight from a coworker from 5 years ago. In a third, there's a lingering guilt about a childhood friend. You aren't actively looking at those tabs, but they are constantly refreshing in the background.
Pulling resources.
Exactly. The computer's memory is entirely siphoned off. The cooling fan is spinning desperately. The entire system slows to a crawl. You cannot type a simple email on the active tab because your underlying processing power is paralyzed by the background noise.
That is a perfect analogy. Gestalt therapy is essentially the process of closing those open tabs. But the mechanism of how they do it is what separates it from traditional psychoanalysis.
How so?
If a client at a Gestalt group brings up a painful memory of their father, the leader never asks why they feel bad. They do not dig into the historical origins of the trauma or seek deep intellectual interpretations.
They don't ask why. Isn't that the whole point of therapy?
Not in Gestalt. Asking why is a trap. It invites the client to intellectualize their pain, to create a neat, rational narrative that keeps them safely disconnected from the actual feeling.
Oh, so they can just tell a sad story without actually feeling it?
Exactly. What's fascinating here is that Gestalt therapists prioritize the how and the what over the why. They focus entirely on the surface of behavior. The therapist will instruct the client, do not tell me a story about your father. Imagine he is sitting in this empty chair. Be here now and speak directly to him.
Forcing the past into the present tense.
Yes, to bypass the brain's intellectual defenses.
And while the client is speaking to the empty chair, the therapist is not analyzing the content of the words, right? They are intensely analyzing the client's physical body.
The therapist is monitoring posture, voice modulation, respiration rates, and microgestures. They will interrupt the client's narrative to ask, what are you experiencing right now? Where exactly do you feel that anxiety in your physical body? I hear your voice dropping to a whisper. What is that whisper trying to accomplish? It demands hyper-awareness of the present moment somatic experience.
This somatic focus is tied to Gestalt's overarching theory of contact. For Gestalt therapists, contact means fully interacting with nature and with other people without losing your sense of individuality. It requires clear awareness and full energy.
But when our RAM is drained by unfinished business, we develop sophisticated coping mechanisms to avoid authentic contact.
Because genuine contact threatens to expose the unresolved pain.
Precisely. The source material outlines 5 major disturbances to contact identified by Irving and Miriam Polster. Let's spend some significant time dissecting these because they represent the exact mechanisms of how we sabotage our own present reality.
Yeah, these are huge.
These boundary disturbances are deeply ingrained survival strategies. The first one is introjection. This is the tendency to uncritically accept others' beliefs, standards, and values without assimilating them and making them congruent with who we actually are.
It is the psychological equivalent of swallowing a meal whole without chewing.
Yes. You just gulp it down.
Taking on your parents' political ideologies or maybe adopting a corporate definition of success without ever subjecting it to your own critical analysis, you just ingest the environmental expectation.
And the danger of introjection is that it binds up your energy in maintaining foreign concepts. When you introject, you are not doing the necessary work of digesting the information, extracting the nutrients that serve you, and discarding the rest.
You're just carrying around someone else's food in your stomach.
Exactly. You lose the boundary between the self and the world. You become a vessel for other people's rules. In a group setting, an interjecting client will constantly look to the therapist or other members for the right answer, completely detached from their own internal compass.
It's an erosion of the self. You are wearing clothes someone else tailored, pretending they fit, and wondering why you feel suffocated.
Perfectly said.
Okay, the second disturbance is the exact inverse: projection. We see this term thrown around in pop psychology constantly, but in Gestalt, it has a very specific mechanical function.
Right. In introjection, we take the environment into ourselves. In projection, we take disowned aspects of ourselves and attribute them to the environment. We experience certain traits or desires, often things we judge as unacceptable, like deep competitiveness or repressed anger, as inconsistent with our idealized self-image.
So we just assign those traits to the people around us.
We project them outward.
If I have a hidden ruthless ambition, but my interjected rulebook says, being ambitious makes you a bad person, I will constantly accuse my colleagues of being cutthroat and hyper-competitive. I am spotting my own shadow in their behavior.
And projection allows you to avoid taking responsibility for your own feelings. It keeps you in a state of powerlessness. If everyone else is aggressive, well, you are merely a victim of circumstance rather than acknowledging that the aggression is radiating from within your own psyche.
How does a Gestalt therapist handle that?
They will often ask a projecting client to physically act out the trait they are accusing someone else of, forcing them to reintegrate that disowned energy.
Man, that's intense. Okay, the third disturbance, retroflexion, is structurally devastating. The definition provided in the text is doing to yourself what you would like to do to someone else, or doing for yourself what you would like someone else to do for you.
Let's examine the somatic loop of retroflexion. If you are deeply furious with an authority figure, but expressing that anger outwardly is deemed neurologically unsafe, perhaps due to childhood conditioning, where does that energetic impulse go?
It has to go somewhere.
It cannot evaporate. The energy turns inward. Instead of making contact with the environment by confronting the threat, you retroflect the hostility.
You attack yourself because the actual target is off limits.
Precisely. This manifests as intense self-criticism, depression, which psychodynamic theory often characterizes as anger turned inward, or it manifests in literal physical self-harm.
Wow.
In a meeting, instead of yelling at a disrespectful boss, you might bite the inside of your cheek until it bleeds or dig your fingernails into your palms. You are creating a closed, destructive loop of energy that severely restricts your engagement with the present moment because all your cognitive resources are tied up in policing and punishing yourself.
The tragedy of retroflexion is how isolating it is. You are fighting a war entirely within your own nervous system. Okay, the fourth disturbance is confluence.
Confluence is the complete blurring of the differentiation between the self and the environment. For a highly confluent individual, there is no clear boundary between inner experience and outer reality. It is driven by a desperate need for acceptance and a complete intolerance of conflict or friction.
We all know the chameleon friend, right?
Oh, absolutely.
You ask where they want to eat, they say wherever you want. You ask their opinion on a controversial topic, they expertly wait to hear your stance and then seamlessly adopt it as their own.
Confluence is a survival strategy aimed at staying safe through invisibility. If there is no boundary between you and me, we cannot clash, we cannot disagree. The relationship feels completely smooth, but the cost is the total annihilation of the authentic self.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
A confluent person expends immense energy maintaining artificial harmony at the expense of genuine contact. In group therapy, a confluent member will constantly agree with everyone and rush to soothe any conflict, preventing the group from doing deep, necessary work.
Because they are terrified of the edges where two different personalities meet.
Exactly.
Finally, the fifth disturbance to contact, deflection. This is the one I think modern society uses most frequently, honestly.
I agree with that. Deflection is the process of distraction. It is a sophisticated way of avoiding sustained, authentic contact by veering off course. People who deflect diffuse emotional intensity. They use excessive humor, ask abstract philosophical questions instead of making direct statements, or talk about deeply personal issues in a highly generalized, intellectualized way.
It's the person who cracks a joke the exact second a conversation gets emotionally vulnerable, or the friend who, when asked how they are surviving a brutal divorce, launches into a sociological analysis of modern marriage statistics instead of simply saying, "I'm terrified and lonely."
They bat the energy away before it can touch them. They speak through and for others, maintaining a safe intellectual distance from the raw reality of the here and now.
So we have interjection, projection, retroflexion, confluence, deflection. These 5 mechanisms are essentially blockades we build to stop energy from flowing naturally. And Gestalt therapy places a massive, unwavering emphasis on this concept of blocked energy, specifically how it manifests physically within the body.
The body is treated as the primary vehicle of communication, far more reliable than the words coming out of a client's mouth.
Because words can lie.
Words can be manipulated to deflect or project. The body rarely lies. Unexpressed emotions create literal, observable physical blockages. Gestalt leaders are trained to look for where energy is located in a client's body, how it is being utilized, and where it is being choked off.
What are they looking for specifically?
They are watching for tension in the neck and shoulders, shallow or restricted breathing, a tight, monotone voice that holds back power, or a clenched jaw that physically prevents words from escaping.
Corey's text even mentions observing micro-movements like a quivering mouth, a swallowed lump in the throat, tapping fingers. The idea is that the body is keeping the score in real time.
And the intervention is unique. Instead of interpreting these movements, instead of saying, you are tapping your foot because you are anxious, the Gestalt therapist simply brings the client's awareness to the physical reality. I notice your hands are clenched into fist while you talk about your mother. What are your hands experiencing?
That's a profound question. What are your hands experiencing?
Right. They might even design an experiment, asking the client to exaggerate the tension, to clench the fists even tighter, forcing them to fully realize the massive amount of energy they are expending just to hold those emotions back.
It forces you out of the abstract narrative and locks you into the undeniable reality of your physical existence in that exact second.
Exactly.
So, we've looked at emotional action on a stage with psychodrama and physical presence in the body with Gestalt. But what generates these disturbances in the first place? Why do we retroflect or introject? This brings us to the third approach, which shifts the lens entirely to the cognitive blueprints governing our behavior. If Gestalt is about closing the open browser tabs in your physical awareness, transactional analysis, or TA, is about debugging the underlying operating system.
I love that analogy. Transactional analysis, developed by Eric Berne, operates on a fundamentally different frequency than psychodrama or Gestalt. It is not highly experiential or emotionally explosive in its initial stages. It is a highly structured, didactic, psychoeducational approach.
So it's more like a classroom.
Yes, the therapist often acts as a teacher, utilizing whiteboards and diagrams. The foundational premise of TA is that cognitive understanding must precede emotional and behavioral change.
Here's where it gets really interesting. TA assumes that you and I are walking around blindly following an intricate set of rules we don't even realize we memorized when we were toddlers. The primary goal of TA in a group setting is to identify early injunctions, the survival rules we were given by caregivers, and the psychological games we endlessly loop through as adults to avoid true intimacy.
To debug this operating system, Burnett created the core framework of TA, the ego states. An ego state is a consistent pattern of feeling and experience directly related to a corresponding consistent pattern of behavior. Byrne theorized that our personality is divided into three distinct ego states: the parent, the adult, and the child.
So we don't just have one personality.
No, we shift between these three states constantly throughout the day, depending entirely on the transaction we're having with our environment.
Let's unpack these, because once you understand this framework, you see it everywhere. Let's start with the parent ego state. This isn't a metaphor for acting responsibly. It is the literal incorporation of the authority figures from your past, right?
Yes. The parent ego state contains the attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors that we absorbed without question from our primary caregivers. It is the repository of shoulds, oughts, and absolute rules. TA subdivides this state into two distinct expressions: the nurturing parent and the controlling parent.
Let's map this onto a real-world scenario. Imagine you are in a high-stakes corporate meeting. A colleague makes a glaring error on a financial presentation. How does the parent ego state react?
Well, if you respond from the controlling parent state, your body language and tone will mimic the discipline you witnessed as a child. You might cross your arms, frown, and state, "I can't believe you missed that. You always rush through your analysis. This is completely unacceptable." Right. You are channeling pure authority, criticism, and rigid rules. Conversely, if you respond from the nurturing parent state, you might lean in and say, "Hey, don't worry about it. Let's sit down after the meeting and fix the spreadsheet together before the client sees it." You are channeling care, support, and protection.
Both reactions are paternalistic, but with vastly different flavors. Now, what happens if we shift into the child ego state?
The child ego state contains all the impulses that come naturally to an infant, as well as the deeply ingrained adaptive behaviors we learn to survive our early environment. This is also split into two primary parts: the natural child, sometimes called the free child, and the adapted child.
Going back to that exact same corporate meeting, if I am the one who made the glaring financial error and my colleague points it out, how does my child ego state react?
If the stress triggers your adapted child ego state, you will revert to the survival behaviors of your youth. You might physically shrink in your chair, avoid eye contact, and over-apologize defensively. "I'm so sorry, I'm an idiot, I was just so overwhelmed, please don't be mad."
You are adapting to the perceived authority in the room, desperately seeking approval and trying to avoid punishment.
Exactly. However, the adapted child can also manifest as rebellion. You might roll your eyes, cross your arms, and snap, "Well, if marketing had given me the right metrics in the first place, this wouldn't have happened."
Over-adapting through submission or rebelling through defiance, both are infantile reactions to adult stress. And the natural child.
The natural child is spontaneous, playful, intuitive, and uninhibited by rules. While it might not be the most advantageous state when defending a financial error.
Probably not.
No, but it is the part of you that wants to doodle on the agenda, crack a joke to break the oppressive tension, or brainstorm a wildly creative solution.
Which leaves the adult ego state. This seems to be the gold standard in TA.
The adult ego state is the objective, rational data processing component of the personality. It operates strictly in the present moment. It assesses current reality, gathers information, and computes probabilities entirely unclouded by the archaic emotions of the child or the inherited judgments of the parent.
So, in that meeting, the adult response to making a mistake is devoid of drama. You are correct, that metric is wrong. I will pull the updated data and distribute a revised presentation by 3:00 p.m. No self-flagellation, no blaming marketing, just objective reality.
Exactly. The initial phase of a TA group involves training members to ruthlessly audit their own ego states. They learn to recognize the physical and linguistic cues that indicate they have slipped into a controlling parent or an adapted child. Once you can accurately identify the state, you gain the cognitive power to consciously switch to the adult state.
This maps so perfectly onto the anatomy of a marital argument. Think about your own arguments at home. If my spouse speaks to me in a controlling parent tone, "You forgot to take out the trash again, you are so irresponsible," it bypasses my adult state entirely.
Yep. It's a direct trigger.
It instantly activates my adapted child to rebel. "Stop treating me like I'm 5 years old, I was busy." Suddenly, two adults in their 30s are trapped in a parent-child transaction. TA gives you the precise vocabulary to pause and say, "Wait, we are in a cross-transaction. Let's both deliberately shift back to our adult ego states and negotiate the chore schedule."
And untangling those cross-transactions is how you stop playing psychological games that destroy intimacy. But TA digs deeper than just monitoring daily transactions. It explores the bedrock upon which those ego states were constructed. It demands an examination of life positions and life scripts.
The life positions concept is where TA gets incredibly intense because it posits that we formulate our basic psychological stance toward the entire world by the time we are 5 years old.
Yes. From an evolutionary psychology perspective, a toddler is entirely dependent on their caregivers for survival. Based on the myriad messages, both verbal and nonverbal, received from those caregivers, the child must make absolute decisions about their own worth and the worth of the external world in order to navigate it safely. TA identifies 4 universal life positions.
The 4 okay.
First, I'm okay. You're
Yeah.
okay. This is the healthy, secure position. I have inherent value, and the people around me have inherent value.
Sounds ideal.
It is. Second, I'm okay. You're not okay. This is a paranoid or superior position. I'm right, the rest of the world is deeply flawed, and I must control others to survive.
Okay, that's a tough one to be around.
Very. Third, I'm not okay. You're okay. This is a depressive, inferior position. Everyone else has the world figured out, but I am fundamentally broken and defective. And fourth, I'm not okay. You're not okay. This is the position of utter futility and schizoid despair. I am broken, the world is hostile, and existence is pointless.
Let's examine that third position. I'm not okay. You're okay. Why would a child voluntarily choose to believe they are defective?
Because for a helpless toddler, realizing that your caregivers, the gods of your universe, are flawed, abusive, or neglectful is psychologically terrifying. It means you are not safe.
So they flip it.
Exactly. It is actually safer and far more adaptive for the child to conclude, my parents are perfect and good. You're okay. Therefore, the reason I am being neglected must be because I am inherently bad. I'm not okay. Taking the blame preserves the necessary illusion of a safe universe. It is a brilliant, tragic mechanism of survival.
And whichever those 4 positions you lock into by age 5 becomes the foundation for your life script. The text describes the life script as an unconscious life plan. It is essentially legacy code running in the background of your brain. It operates like a literal, dramatic stage production.
It dictates the cast of characters you will draw into your life, the overarching theme of your relationships, and crucially, the tragic ending you unconsciously expect and actively drive toward. It is a blueprint that tells us where we are going in life and what will inevitably happen when we arrive.
In group therapy, members utilize a comprehensive script checklist to decode this legacy code. They rigorously analyze their early history to identify the models they observed, the specific injunctions they were programmed with, such as don't be close to anyone, don't succeed, or don't show anger, the psychological payoffs they receive from playing games, and the ultimate tragic ending they are steering toward.
They deconstruct their original family drama to understand the script they are endlessly rehearsing with their current friends and partners.
But this raises a massive critical question for me. If transactional analysis is explicitly telling me that I made these core decisions about my life script and chose my basic psychological position before I was 5 years old, how is it remotely fair to hold me responsible for my behavior now? I mean, I was a toddler.
It's a really valid point.
Right. I was utilizing legacy code programmed by a child just trying to survive a specific environment. How can an adult be held accountable for a script written by a 4-year-old?
That tension is the exact pivot point of the therapeutic intervention. TA entirely acknowledges that you made those decisions as a child strictly for survival. You had to adapt to your environment to secure love or simply to stay physically safe. The initial programming was not your fault.
Okay.
However, as an adult in a completely different environment, you are now the one responsible for maintaining that outdated script. And because you are the author of the script, you possess the cognitive authority to rewrite it. This leads directly to redecision therapy, pioneered by Robert and Mary Golding within the TA framework.
Redecision therapy. How do you rewrite code that is that deeply embedded?
The Gouldings discovered a critical flaw in purely cognitive therapy. You cannot rewrite a deeply embedded childhood emotional decision exclusively from the rational adult ego state. If you merely analyze it intellectually, you will say, yes, I recognize that I decided I wasn't worthy of love when I was 4 because my father ignored me. You have the insight, but the behavioral loop remains unbroken.
The tab is still open.
Yes. To actually rewrite the script, the client must bypass the prefrontal cortex and re-access the limbic system. They must return to the child ego state.
You have to go back to the scene of the crime.
Exactly. Using fantasy, visualization, and often incorporating the exact psychodramatic techniques we discussed earlier, the therapist guides the member to vividly re-experience the emotional intensity of those early scenes. They mentally regress to the specific moment the injunction was given.
But something's different this time.
The variable has changed. They are not alone. They have the support of the therapist and the group. While fully inhabiting the child ego state, feeling the original terror or grief, they make a new decision. They consciously reject the old injunction. They step out of the tragic script.
They close the loop. They realize on a visceral emotional level that they are no longer 4 years old. They are no longer trapped in that house, and that survival strategy is now obsolete. The legacy code is finally overwritten.
And when a true redecision occurs in a group setting, the shift is undeniable. The change in the person's posture, their vocal resonance, and their energy is palpable to everyone in the room. They have aligned their emotional reality with their adult capability.
We have meticulously covered 3 massive, clinically distinct approaches to group counseling. We explored the theatrical externalization of psychodrama, the somatic present tense awareness of Gestalt, and the cognitive restructuring of transactional analysis. Let's move into our integration phase. How do these 3 frameworks interact, and what is the practical application for the listener?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it becomes clear that these 3 approaches are not mutually exclusive. They form a comprehensive matrix of healing. A master group therapist seamlessly weaves them together to address the entirety of the human experience. Psychodrama provides the physical stage and the profound neurological tool of empathy through role reversal. It brings the internal conflict out into the open space.
It puts the problem in the room where we can actually look at it.
Then Gestalt therapy prevents the client from hiding behind the acting. It forces awareness of the physical body. It points out that while you are delivering this powerful monologue to an empty chair, your breath is shallow and your fists are trembling. It anchors the theatrical action strictly in present physical reality.
And then transactional analysis provides the map and the vocabulary. It offers the cognitive framework to understand why the body is tense and why the memory is playing out in a specific way. It allows the client to step back into the adult ego state and realize, I was acting out a don't succeed injunction from my life script, which caused my adapted child to panic.
Action, body, and mind. And the crucial catalyst that ignites all 3 of these approaches is the group itself. The audience providing a supportive mirror in psychodrama, the witnesses holding space in Gestalt, the members providing what TA calls positive strokes when someone attempts a new, healthier behavior. You cannot heal deep interpersonal trauma in a vacuum. You must heal it in connection with other nervous systems. The shared emotional space of the group provides the necessary friction and safety for change.
And this brings it directly back to you, the listener. The beauty of exploring these clinical frameworks is that you don't need to be sitting in a circle of folding chairs in a therapy session to utilize them. These are immediate, practical tools for auditing your everyday life. Tomorrow, during a frustrating conversation with your boss or a tense negotiation with a partner, mentally check your ego state. Are you reacting defensively as an adapted child, or are you processing the data as a rational adult?
Monitor your physical boundaries, too. If your jaw is clenched during a meeting or your shoulders are creeping up to your ears, pause and ask yourself what unfinished business is siphoning off your energy in the here and now. Are you retroflecting anger that you feel unsafe expressing? Are you interjecting a standard of perfection that doesn't actually belong to you?
You can even utilize role reversal in your own mind. Before you fire off a deeply angry email to a colleague, spend 60 seconds attempting to physically and mentally inhabit their perspective. What intense pressures are they operating under? What does their emotional reality look like? It shatters the rigid narrative and builds immediate, necessary empathy.
These frameworks, when understood and applied, grant us the power to make the invisible dynamics of our social lives entirely visible. And once you can clearly see the mechanics of a dynamic, you possess the agency to change it.
So, what does this all mean? We've transitioned from viewing human psychology as a murky, broken X-ray to realizing we actually possess a highly sophisticated set of lenses to decode our own behavior. We can see the stage we are acting on, feel the energy in our bodies, and rewrite the code running in our minds. I want to thank our expert for this brilliant, rigorous breakdown of how group counseling approaches systematically unlock the human psyche.
It has been a privilege to unpack these mechanics with you. I want to leave the listener with a final thought that synthesizes the concepts we've explored today. I want you to think deeply about your life script from transactional analysis. If you are unconsciously forcing yourself to play a specific, tragic, or limiting role based on a desperate survival decision you made when you were 4 years old, what does that mean for the people in your life right now?
Oh, wow.
Are you unconsciously forcing your friends, your partners, your children, and your coworkers to serve as auxiliary egos from psychodrama? Are you constantly casting them in a tragedy they never auditioned for, manipulating their behavior so you can fulfill a script you didn't even realize you were reading?
That is a staggering implication. We are actively casting the people we love most into our own unhealed childhood trauma plays, demanding they hit the marks of our unfinished business.
It is an uncomfortable but entirely necessary question to explore. Because the moment you realize you are the author of the script, you stop being a victim of it. You gain the absolute power to start writing a new one today.
Take a deep breath, ground yourself in the here and now, close those open browser tabs in your mind, and thank you for joining us on this deep dive.